There were wounds that bled where everyone could see them, and there were wounds a pack trained itself not to notice because admitting them would ruin the story it preferred to tell. A woman could stand in the center of a hall carrying life beneath her ribs and still be called empty. A husband could be toasted as honorable while his grave stayed unfilled. A lie could wear silk and law and ritual marks, and by the time truth reached the door, truth was the one treated like a trespasser. Aurora Frostborn learned that lesson in Thornwood Keep, with winter rain drumming against the iron-framed windows and 30 wolves pretending not to look at the blood on her hem. She stood in the lower gallery because no one had offered her a chair. 8 months pregnant, back aching, ankles swollen, she kept one hand beneath her belly to steady the pressure that had been building all day. The other clutched a rough strip of dark wool, what remained of Mikhail's travel cloak, torn where she had yanked it free from the hidden chest beneath Nikolai's desk. The cloth still smelled faintly of cedar oil and smoke. Her husband had been killed by rogues 6 weeks earlier, at least according to the speeches Nikolai gave with tears that never reached his face. Now the Thornwood Council watched her as though she had dragged rot into their polished hall. "You are in no condition to challenge established testimony," Senior Captain Rurik said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Men like him built power from calm cruelty. "Return to your chambers." Aurora swallowed the iron taste in her mouth. "My chambers were stripped this morning. My guard was removed. My meal was drugged last night." A ripple passed through the gathered wolves. Not shock. Calculation. From the dais, Nikolai Thornwood rose with practiced grief in every line of his body, silver threaded through black hair, formal coat immaculate. "You are overwrought," he said gently, like a father correcting a child. "Loss has harmed your judgment. We have all been patient with your accusations." Patient. The word cut deeper than if he had shouted. Aurora lifted the torn cloak higher. "This was hidden in your private strongbox. Mikhail wore this when he left for the border. You told the pack his body was burned beyond recognition. Why keep this?" Nikolai's expression did not crack. "Because I could not bury everything." A few wolves lowered their heads in respectful silence. It would have been convincing if Aurora had not also found the ledger beneath the cloak. Payments to 2 border captains, coded notations, dates matching the night Mikhail disappeared. She had not been able to take the full book without being caught. She had torn out 3 pages and tucked them into the lining of her shift, where they now scratched against her skin like hidden teeth. Lady Isra, Nikolai's sister by marriage and the loudest voice among Thornwood matrons, clicked her tongue. Look at her, wild-eyed, bleeding, carrying scraps and calling it evidence. The moon warned us this one was wrong from the start. Another woman answered from the second row. Broken girls birth broken blood? Aurora felt the words hit her harder than the labor-like cramps that had stalked her for days. Broken. Again. They had called her that when she did not conceive in her first year. They had called her that when she did conceive after Mikhail's death, and would not name the child's future as Nikolai wished. They called her that now because it made betrayal easier to organize. She forced her voice steady. "I am not asking for mercy. I am invoking kin right under Frostborn law. I demand safe escort to Blackwood territory to submit testimony before neutral witnesses." At that, real reaction finally stirred. Several counselors exchanged sharp looks. Blackwood was old power. Blackwood meant scrutiny. Nikolai descended 1 step from the dais, palms open. "You are family. Why would you flee to strangers?" He stopped at the exact distance that looked respectful and felt threatening. "Give me whatever papers you took, and I will forget this spectacle. You can remain protected until your child is born." Protected. The way a trap was protected from wind. Inside her, fear tightened into focus. The choice was no longer between dignity and humiliation. It was between movement and a cage she would not leave alive. She did not hand him anything. No. For the first time, a thin edge entered his voice. Aurora. The gallery doors opened behind her. Two border captains stepped in wearing travel mud on their boots. Captain Vane and Captain Sorrel. The names from the ledger. They avoided her eyes. Rurik announced, "These officers return tonight with sworn statements. They report Lady Aurora requested tinctures 3 days before Alpha Mikhail's death. Tinctures commonly used in blood-thinning poison." A hush dropped heavy across the hall. Aurora stared at them, then at Nikolai. The pieces locked together so cleanly she nearly admired the architecture of it. He had set the foundation weeks ago. Public mourning. Isolated widow. Quiet rumors. Now witnesses. Sorrel cleared his throat. "We delivered what she asked." "I asked for willow bark and fever leaf for the nursery," Aurora said, "for pups with winter cough." Vane shrugged, shame flickering and vanishing. "Not what we recorded." Isra made a small sound of triumph. "There, hear it? She poisons one child and now she carries another. The goddess spares no warning." Aurora's pulse pounded at the base of her throat. Not for herself. Never for herself now. For the life rolling under her palm. For the way the room had already decided what story to repeat tomorrow. Grieving uncle, unstable widow, dangerous mother. In that suspended moment, she understood the real accusation they were building. Not murder alone, contamination. If they branded her a danger to children, no pack would shelter her. No tribunal would touch her case except to make an example. Present tense panic surged through her thoughts as if she were split in two, standing and falling at once. I stay, they take the pages. I stay. They name me unclean and lock me in the old north rooms where no one hears. I stay. My child is born into hands that barter bloodlines like livestock. I cannot out-argue this room. I cannot outrank them. I can only move before they close every gate. Nikolai spoke again, soft enough that only she and the first row should have heard. "Do not make this uglier. Hand me what you stole, and I will see that your child is placed honorably when the time comes." Placed, not raised by her. In placed. Aurora stepped backward until her shoulders touched the cold stone by the gallery arch. "When the time comes," she said carefully, "you mean when I am no longer useful." His smile held, his eyes did not. "You are exhausted. Take her to the West Tower." Rurik moved first. Aurora turned and ran. The breaking point came not as one dramatic blow, but as a corridor of small, irreversible choices. She knew Thornwood Keep better than any of the men chasing her because she had mapped its servant passages during her first lonely winter as Mikhail's bride. Left at the tapestry of the river hunt. Down the narrow stair where the third step groaned. Through the laundry court where steam from dye vats turned the air bitter and hot. Pain cinched across her lower back, hard enough to buckle her knees, and she bit down on the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood. Not now. Not here. Boots hammered behind her. "Aurora, stop!" someone shouted. "You will fall." That almost made her laugh, as if falling were a new danger. She cut through the kennel yard, startling 2 sentry hounds that lunged against their chains, then ducked beneath the half-lifted delivery gate and tore her sleeve on the iron hinge. Rain struck her face in slanting sheets. Night had dropped fully by then, and torchlight from the guard towers swayed in blurred halos through water and wind. At the stable wall, she paused only long enough to drag a canvas satchel from the nook where she had hidden it that morning when dread first began whispering in her bones. Dried meat, a skin of water, bandages, a small moonstone pendant from her mother, and the 3 ledger pages wrapped in waxed cloth. No jewels, no heirloom rings, nothing that would slow her. A stable boy emerged from the shadows, no older than 16, eyes wide. "My lady, Captain Rurik said you were not to leave. I know what he said. She pressed the moonstone into the boy's shaking hand before she could change her mind. You never saw me. He hesitated, then stepped aside. She chose the oldest mare, Brindle, because young horses spooked at storm thunder and she could not afford to be thrown. Mounting sent a sharp protest through her hips and spine. She breathed through it, fingers numb on the reins, and urged the mare toward the east postern where wall patrols changed every quarter hour. By the time she reached the postern, rainwater had soaked through cloak and shift alike. Her belly tightened again, then eased. A labor scare, not labor. She repeated the distinction like a prayer. The gate watch was half asleep, hood pulled low. Aurora dropped her voice into the clipped certainty of command she had learned, watching Mikhail settle disputes. Nikolai ordered me to fetch the Blackwood healer from the lower pass. The widow in the birthing house is failing. Open. The guard squinted through rain. At this hour. Do you intend to explain that delay to him? That did it. He swore under his breath, lifted the bar, and pulled the postern wide enough for horse and rider. Aurora did not look back as she rode into the tree line. Wind shredded the path into moving black and silver. Branches clawed at her shoulders. Somewhere behind, a horn sounded once, then twice, then 3 times in quick succession. Alarm. She leaned low over Brindle's neck and whispered apologies into wet mane each time the mare stumbled. Hours blurred into hoofbeats and pain and a stubborn thread of direction pointing west toward Blackwood markers carved into boundary stones. Just before dawn, the storm thinned to a hard drizzle. Mist pooled in the valley floor. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the reins when the first Blackwood sentries emerged from the fog. Massive wolves in partial shift, spears angled, eyes bright in the gray light. "Halt!" one called. Aurora slid from the saddle and almost went to her knees. "Safe passage," she managed. "I request sanctuary under old law. I carry evidence against Nikolai Thornwood." The sentries closed in, wary, scenting blood, fear, pregnancy, stranger. From within the fortress beyond, a child's raw, exhausted scream cut through stone and rain, sharp enough to make every wolf flinch. Aurora's skin went cold. A second scream followed, thinner, ragged, then choking silence broken by frantic voices inside the gate. The older sentry cursed softly. "Cassian again." Another guard muttered, "He has not slept in 6 nights." Aurora pressed one hand to the torn cloak at her side, the other to the life turning beneath her palm, and understood with bone-deep certainty that whatever waited beyond those gates had already braided itself to her fate. The older sentry followed her gaze toward the inner ward and grimaced as another cry tore through the rain. He shifted back toward human form in a ripple of muscle and wet fur, broad shoulders straining a dark tunic marked with the Blackwood crest. Up close, he looked less like a border guard and more like a carved wall, scar down his jaw, eyes assessing every weakness she did not have strength left to hide. "Name," he said. "Aurora Frostborn, widow of Mikhail Thornwood." The title scraped her throat raw. "I am invoking sanctuary under old law." At Mikhail's name, the younger sentry exchanged a look with the first. Suspicion sharpened. Thornwood politics had traveled farther than she had guessed. "We heard you poisoned him," the younger one said. The accusation landed exactly where Nikolai wanted it to. Aurora drew in rain-heavy air and forced herself not to sway. "Then search me. Strip my satchel. Bind my hands if you must. But if that child is ill, stop wasting time deciding whether I am convenient." For 2 heartbeats, neither wolf moved. Then the older sentry jerked his chin toward the gate. "Bring her. If she lies, Alpha decides the cost." They led her through a fortress built for winter and war. Blackwood stone rose in severe lines, old mortar dark with age, watchfires set in iron cages along the walls where smoke curled blue against low cloud. The place smelled of pine pitch, wet leather, and wolf. Warriors moved in disciplined silence despite the chaos near the central hall, where healers and attendants crossed at a run carrying steaming bowls, herbs, clean cloth, and expressions stretched thin by fear. Aurora's body kept trying to fold in on itself. Her lower back throbbed. Her calves spasmed from hours in the saddle. The child under her ribs shifted, a firm roll followed by stillness, and she pressed her palm there in reflexive reassurance. "Not now," she begged without words. "Let me get us through this door." They took her to an antechamber outside a nursery wing. A woman in healer gray blocked the threshold, silver braids pinned tight, apron marked by fever wash and crushed mint. Her gaze dropped at once to Aurora's belly, then to the blood on her hem, then to the cloak clenched in her fist. "Absolutely not," the healer said to the sentries. "She is exhausted, likely in false labor, and unknown to us. I will not have an outsider near the heir." From inside the room came a choking sob too small to bear. A child trying and failing to breathe around terror. Aurora flinched. "How old?" "5." The healer's tone remained flint. "His name is Cassian. He has not kept food down. His fever spikes with storms, and every sedative has failed. He panics the moment he wakes." A low voice came from the corridor behind them, deep enough to still the movement of everyone within earshot. "What is this?" Aurora turned before she could stop herself. Lucian Blackwood did not enter spaces so much as alter them. He was taller than any male in the hall, dark hair damp at the temples, a fur-lined cloak thrown over battle-worn black leathers as though he had dressed for both council and bloodshed and found no contradiction. Power sat on him without display. His face held no softness, only controlled strain and a vigilance so intense it looked like pain. She recognized the expression because she had worn its mirror for weeks, the look of someone who had not slept because sleep required trust. His eyes landed on her and narrowed. Not lust, not welcome. Calculation first, then something harder to read. The healer stepped toward him. "Alpha. She claims sanctuary. Thornwood widow. The border sentries brought her in." "Why is she here and not in triage?" Lucian asked, gaze still on Aurora. "Because she demanded to be brought to the screaming child," the older sentry said. Aurora met Lucian's stare and held it through the instinct to lower her head. "I demanded no such thing. Your child screamed. I heard it at the gate." "Not your child." The correction was immediate and sharp. "My son." Another cry cut through the door, ragged and hoarse, then a violent coughing fit. Lucian's jaw tightened. He looked at the healer. Status: fever at dawn, down briefly, up again. No seizures since midnight. No identifiable toxin. He fights sleep until collapse. Aurora spoke before caution could reclaim her. "Has anyone checked for scent-triggered panic from a dominant male's residual mark?" The healer blinked. "Of course we checked." "He is 5," Aurora said, softer now, because she heard her own desperation in the words. "His body is small, and his instincts are older than language. If someone he trusted smelled wrong or vanished suddenly, his nervous system would read every closed room as danger." Silence met her, not agreement, not dismissal. A dangerous pause while Rank decided whether she had overstepped. Lucian moved first, one step closer, enough for her to catch rain and cedar and steel on his scent. "You speak as if you know him." "I know frightened children," she said, "and I know what it costs when adults debate protocol while a child drowns in it." A muscle flexed in his cheek. "If you harm him, you will not leave this fortress alive." "That is fair." The healer made a distressed sound. "Alpha, open the door," Lucian said. Inside, heat hit like a wall. Braziers burned at both corners. Thick curtains had been drawn against drafts. turning the nursery into a dim cave of shadow and lamplight. Cassian lay twisted in sweat-soaked blankets, dark curls plastered to his forehead, little fists clenched so hard his knuckles had blanched. Two attendants tried to hold him as he thrashed weakly, half awake, whimpering in broken gasps that rose to shrieks whenever anyone leaned too close. Aurora stopped 3 paces from the bed and waited. "Cassian," she said, keeping her voice low and even, "I am not touching you yet." His lashes fluttered. Panic surged again. He arched away from the attendants, eyes unfocused, chest fluttering. She looked to Lucian. "Permission." His reply was a curt nod, but his hand had already shifted, claws threatening at the tips, as if he could tear apart danger before it reached the mattress. Aurora set Mikhail's torn cloak and her satchel on a side chair within her sightline. She lifted both hands where everyone could see them and stepped forward slowly, knees trembling from fatigue. When she laid her palm against Cassian's brow, the effect was immediate and uncanny. The boy's rigid shoulders dropped. His breath caught once, twice, then lengthened. The frantic tightness in his mouth eased. Within heartbeats, the screams dissolved into a soft, exhausted sigh, and he folded toward her hand, as if he had been searching for that exact point of contact for days. No one in the room moved. Aurora kept her hand steady and swallowed against the ache rising behind her sternum. Heat gathered in her skin. Not fever. Something brighter and clean, like moonlight made warm. Cassian's pulse, wild a moment ago beneath the thin skin of his throat, began to settle into an even rhythm. He slept. Truly slept. The first unbroken rest written across his face like a miracle no one trusted yet. Behind her, someone whispered, "Moon witness." Lucian did not speak. She felt his attention like pressure between her shoulders, focused and unblinking. By the time the stormlight outside shifted from gray to the pale gold of late morning, rumors had already outrun the walls. Some wolves called it a trick. Others called it old blood answering old blood. No one called it ordinary. By moonrise, the fortress had split down its hidden fault lines. Aurora sat in a straight-backed chair beside Cassian's bed, too wary to sleep, while the nursery lamps burned low and the rain finally eased into intermittent drips from the eaves. The healer had forced broth on her, checked her pulse, declared the cramping settled, and argued unsuccessfully that she needed full rest in a separate chamber. Aurora had agreed to move only after Cassian woke once, saw her face, and went back down without tears. Even then she refused the southern suites and chose the room adjoining the nursery, door unlatched. Every instinct she owned remained sharpened to threat. She had stored the 3 ledger pages beneath the false bottom of her wash basin chest, wrapped in waxed cloth and tied with thread from her torn sleeve so she would know if anyone tampered with them. She had counted steps from bed to door, from door to corridor, from corridor to stair. She had identified which window could fit her body if she needed to climb out. Now, close to midnight, Cassian stirred again. Not screaming this time. A frightened murmur, small and searching. Aurora rose with a groan she could not hide and leaned over him. "I am here." The child's fingers fisted in her sleeve. His skin still ran too warm, but not burning. He blinked up at her, pupils wide in the dimness. "Don't go." "I will not go while you sleep." He nodded once, solemn as a vow, and his eyes drifted shut. The door opened without a creak. Lucian stepped in, closing it quietly behind him. He had shed the cloak and gauntlets, wearing only a dark shirt rolled to his forearms, runic scars faintly visible along the inside of his wrists, where old magic had marked him. Without court armor around him, the exhaustion in his face was starker. So was the restraint. He asked for water, Aurora whispered. 2 sips only. Lucian inclined his head in acknowledgement, then moved to the opposite side of the bed. For a long moment neither spoke. Cassian's breathing filled the space between them, steady as tide. When Lucian finally lifted his gaze to hers, the world narrowed with violent precision. A hot silver thread snapped tight from the center of Aurora's chest to his. The sensation was not metaphor but force, visceral and undeniable, as if a hidden tether had been yanked through bone and lit from both ends. A charged current skated along her nerves, down her spine, across her palms. Her pulse surged, milk let down in a sudden ache that made her catch her breath. Beneath her skin, instincts that grief had smothered for months came awake all at once, protective and fierce and bewilderingly hungry for nearness. Lucian staggered one step, hand bracing on the bedpost. His eyes flashed gold, bright and feral in the dim room, and a sharp intake of breath broke from him like a wound opening. Then the alpha who had terrified half the valley dropped to one knee beside the child's bed, as if the bond had struck him hard enough to force submission. Aurora could not move. "This is wrong," her mind said in a hard, present tense rush that drowned everything else. "This is dangerous. This is how captivity changes shape and calls itself shelter. You are still married in your bones, still hunted, still carrying a child with enemies waiting at every border. You cannot want this man. You cannot trust a body response as truth. Want has been weaponized before. Tenderness has been staged. Men with soft voices have signed death orders. Do not forget. Do not forget." But the pull held, relentless, and under the panic another fact rose with terrible clarity. Some part of her had recognized him the moment he entered the corridor, and now that recognition had a name she could not argue away. "Mate." Lucian's voice came rougher than before, stripped of command. "Tell me what you felt." Aurora's hand tightened on Cassian's blanket. "A tether. Heat. A pull I did not consent to." His mouth curved without humor. "Neither did I. You expect that to reassure me? No." He lifted his head, and the gold in his irises receded to ember, predator banked but present. "I expect honesty." They held each other's gaze across sleeping child and moonlit sheets, two people dragged toward the same center by a force neither would have chosen tonight. Tension stretched, brittle and bright, not yet trust and not yet surrender, but no longer denial. Cassian slept between them, one small hand still tangled in Aurora's sleeve, as if anchoring them both to the same fragile promise. The nursery door rattled in its frame as thunder rolled over the fortress, long and low, and Cassian made a soft, distressed sound without waking. Aurora's knees weakened at the same moment, pain cinching hard across her lower belly and into her spine, a band of pressure so sudden she gripped the bedrail to stay upright. Lucian was on his feet at once. "Healer." Two attendants reached for her from opposite sides, efficient, impersonal hands already trying to turn her toward the corridor, but another contraction seized and held. Aurora sucked in air through her teeth. Her vision narrowed to lamplight, carved bedposts, the scent of rain pressing against stone. "I am not being carried anywhere," she said, each word clipped. "You are not in condition to decide that," one attendant snapped. Lucian's voice cut through the room, quiet and absolute. "Take your hands off her." Both women froze. He did not raise his volume, yet command radiated from him with the force of a drawn blade. The silver-braided healer entered a heartbeat later, her expression sharp with triage focus. "Cramps again?" Aurora nodded, breath uneven. "Worse than this morning." The healer pressed two fingers to Aurora's wrist, then glanced at the storm-black windows. Stress triggered. "Likely false labor, but we need her resting now. Warmth to lower back, slow breathing, no crowding." "Then clear the room," Lucian said. The healer hesitated. "Alpha, she is your—" "Clear the room." That earned startled looks. Attendants began gathering bowls and cloths, moving quickly now, while the healer gave clipped instructions about tea and compresses from the doorway. Within moments, Only Aurora and Lucian remained with sleeping Cassian, thunder muttering above them like an unsettled god. Aurora braced both palms on the bed and waited for the next wave. It came with punishing precision, drawing a sound from her throat she had tried not to make in front of anyone. Fear followed right behind the pain. Not labor, she told herself. Not tonight. Her child kicked once in protest, then stilled. Lucian crossed to the nearest brazier and held his hands above the coals until heat reddened his knuckles. He did not touch her. He turned and stopped a careful distance away, gaze fixed on her face rather than her body. "May I put my hands on your back?" he asked. "Or do you want space?" The question startled her more than the pain had. In Thornwood, men with rank did not ask. They directed. They interpreted silence as permission and refusal as disobedience. Another cramp locked her muscles. She gave a small, jerking nod. "Lower. Not my abdomen." He moved behind her, each step deliberate enough that she always knew where he was. Warmth settled through the fabric at the base of her spine when he laid both palms there, broad and steady, never roaming, never claiming. The relief was not dramatic, but it was real, a gradual unwinding in tissues clenched too long. "Breathe with me," he said. He counted in a low cadence, rough voice softened into rhythm. In, 2, 3. Hold. Out. 2, 3, 4. She tried to follow and failed, then tried again. The pain still came, but it stopped owning every inch of her. His hands stayed where she had directed. He adjusted pressure only after she shifted. Once, when her shoulder brushed his chest as she swayed, he stepped back first. Present tense fear surged through her thoughts in a bright, relentless stream. I know this sequence. Kindness first, patience next, then debt, then cage. I know how power wraps itself in tenderness until refusing looks ungrateful. But he asked. He waits. He does not trap me against his body when I am weakest. He could, and everyone would call it his right. He does not. What do I do with a man who can dominate and chooses restraint instead? What do I do with this pull in my chest that feels like danger and shelter in the same breath? The next contraction crested and receded. Aurora sagged forward, damp hair clinging to her temples. "Again," she whispered. He resumed counting immediately. By the time the healer returned with steeping herbs, Aurora's breathing had slowed, and the rigid panic in her muscles had eased into exhaustion. The healer checked her abdomen, listened at her belly with practiced care, then gave Lucian an assessing look that held equal parts surprise and reluctant approval. "Not active labor," she said. "Storm pressure and stress. She needs warmth, food, and sleep. If the pattern changes, send for me." Lucian inclined his head. "You have my word." He walked Aurora to the adjoining chamber but did not guide her with his hands. At the threshold he stopped. "Do you want guards inside, outside, or not at all?" "Outside corridor only," she said. "No one in the room unless I ask." "Done." She stared at him, waiting for argument, for correction, for some reminder that his authority outranked her fear. None came. He only watched her with that same controlled intensity he brought to battle reports and fever charts, as though her boundaries were data to be respected, not obstacles to be worn down. "I am told you do not sleep," he said after a moment. "Neither do you." "True." His mouth shifted, almost a smile and not one. "Drink the tea before it turns to swamp water. My healers brew punishment, not comfort." A surprised breath escaped her, close to a laugh despite everything. The sound felt foreign in her own throat. He stepped back, bowed his head once in formal acknowledgement, and left. Aurora changed into a dry shift with shaking hands, drank the bitter tea, and lowered herself onto the bed inch by inch. Rain thickened again, drumming against shutters. She told herself she would rest for 10 breaths, no more. Sleep did not come, but near midnight she heard the muted scrape of leather against stone just beyond her door. She rose, crossed the room, and eased the latch open a finger's width. Lucian sat on the corridor floor with his back to the opposite wall, forearms on his knees, head tipped back, eyes closed, but not asleep. No cloak, no weapons drawn, no pretense. A single guard stood farther down the hall by the stair and deliberately looked away, giving his alpha privacy he had not requested. Aurora opened the door a little wider. "You have rooms." Without opening his eyes, Lucian answered, "I know." "Then why are you here?" His lashes lifted. Amber had bled into his irises in the low light, predator close, but contained. "Because if you wake in pain or fear, I want you to hear someone you can summon who will come immediately. Not a stranger, not a council voice. Me." She held the edge of the door until her knuckles ached. "You think sitting outside proves you are safe?" "No," he said. "I think safety is proven slowly. Tonight this is what I can offer without crossing a line. You did not move." The corridor quieted around them, rain and distant hearth crackle filling the gaps where excuses might have gone. Aurora nodded once and closed the door. Not latched this time. When she returned to bed, the tight knot behind her ribs had loosened by a fraction she could finally feel. By the fourth evening after the storm, Cassian had slept 2 full nights in succession and eaten broth without vomiting. Yet the fortress tension had only changed shape. Rumors moved faster when fear had nowhere obvious to land. Whispers reached Aurora through servant roots and half-shut doors. Thornwood riders near the eastern boundary forged testimony, enchantment, outsider scent in the heir's nursery. When the summons to council arrived, it came on stiff parchment and colder protocol. Aurora entered the great chamber with her spine straight and the ledger pages hidden where no one would find them quickly. The room smelled of wax, wet wool, and old authority. Senior wolves lined the long oak table, silver markings denoting rank and bloodline, expressions arranged into concern that felt like accusation wearing gloves. Lucian took the high seat at the table's head but did not look away when Aurora chose to stand rather than sit in the guest chair set 2 paces behind him. Elder Meron, thin as a blade and twice as sharp, spoke first. "Alpha, we acknowledge your son's improvement. We also acknowledge the political risk now entrenched in your nursery." Another elder followed, heavy-browed and blunt. "Thornwood has submitted written claim that Lady Aurora poisoned her husband and fled prosecution. They demand transfer under reciprocal law." Aurora felt every gaze turn, weighing her worth against convenience. "She should be confined pending verification," Marin said. "A private suite with guard rotation, no access to the air, no contact with records. If innocent, she loses nothing but temporary freedom. If guilty, we prevent catastrophe." The words were neat, bureaucratic, almost gentle. That made them more dangerous than shouted threats. Cages built from procedure were hardest to break. A younger councilwoman leaned forward, voice edged with disdain she did not bother to hide. "And there is the matter of influence. A child does not attach that suddenly without compulsion. We have all heard stories of scent luring from desperate women seeking status." Cassian's small hand clutching Aurora's sleeve flashed through her mind, not as politics, but memory. Aurora's nails bit into her palms. Present tense resolve rose in her like a drawn breath held to steadiness. "I do not plead in this room. I do not shrink to make them comfortable. They are waiting for tears, for panic, for any gesture they can rename hysteria. Stand still. Let them spend their certainty aloud. Let them show their shape in full daylight." Lucian had not moved while they spoke. Now he placed both hands on the oak table, claws extending with a clean metallic rasp that silenced the chamber in an instant. He dragged them once across the polished surface, leaving 4 deep furrows through maps, petitions, and seals. Listen carefully, he said. No one interrupted. Any wolf who threatens Aurora Frostborn or her unborn child is challenging Alpha Law directly. Not custom, not debate. Law. He turned his head toward Marin first, then the others, meeting each stare until eyes dropped one by one. You do not confine a sanctuary claimant because rival territory submits convenient paper. You investigate paper. Marin swallowed. Alpha, our concern is pack safety. My son is pack safety, Lucian snapped. He slept for the first time in weeks with her hand on his brow while your protocols failed. You will not call that compulsion because your pride dislikes the witness. The younger councilwoman drew herself up. You are compromised by the mate bond. A charged pause followed, the statement both accusation and acknowledgement. Yes, Lucian said, unflinching. I am bound. That is why I am speaking in legal terms you cannot misread. Record this. He looked to the scribe by the pillar. From this hour, Aurora Frostborn holds full sanctuary status under Blackwood protection, equal to bloodkin rights while her petition is heard. Her chambers are reassigned beside the heir's nursery by my order. Any challenge routes through me in open council, never in corridor rumor. He stood, and the movement carried the room with it. Second order. Begin formal review of Thornwood submissions for forgery markers, chain of custody breaks, and witness coercion. I want the ink age tested, seal pressure compared, and messenger trail verified. The scribe's quill shook but kept moving. No one argued. The prevailing silence was not agreement. It was calculation recalibrating around a boundary now marked in steel. Aurora realized she had been holding her breath. She let it out slowly and felt the chamber tilt, not from weakness this time, but from a strange, non-trivial relief. He had not protected her in private and abandoned her in public. He had done the opposite of what power usually did. He had made protection visible, enforceable, costly to violate. Council dismissed in clipped formalities. Wolves filed out in controlled lines, some stiff with resentment, some openly unsettled. A few giving Aurora quick, measuring glances that held the first hint of respect. At the doorway, Lucian slowed beside her without touching. You should have legal copies of the sanctuary decree by nightfall, he said. If any wolf tests it, you report names directly to me. Aurora studied his profile, the fatigue at the corners of his eyes, the controlled anger still humming beneath his skin. You burned political capital for me. I enforced my law. That is not the same thing. He looked at her then, fully. No, he said. It is not. They walked the corridor to the nursery wing in quiet, their steps finding a rhythm neither commented on. Outside, rain had finally cleared. Moonlight pooled along the stone floor in pale bands. At Cassian's door, Aurora paused, hand on the latch. I am still afraid of this, she said, not looking away from him. Of the bond, of needing what can be taken. Lucian inclined his head, accepting the admission without trying to ease it. Keep your fear, keep your caution. I am not asking for trust you cannot give. She opened the door halfway, then turned back. You sat outside my room all night. I did. Tonight, she said, pulse steadying with the words. You can sit inside the nursery, by the window, not closer. A quiet, startled softness crossed his face and disappeared beneath discipline. As you choose. It was not surrender. It was not peace. But when Aurora stepped into Cassian's lamplit room and heard Lucian follow at the distance she had set, her guard lowered by one deliberate inch. And for the first time, that did not feel like losing. Lucian took the chair by the nursery window exactly where she had indicated, forearms on his knees, profile turned partly toward Cassian and partly toward the corridor beyond the glass. Moonlight traced the hard lines of his face and caught the pale runes at his wrists, making them look less like scars than old promises written into flesh. He did not speak. Aurora settled beside Cassian's bed, one hand lightly over the child's blanket, and listened to the layered quiet of the room, the pop of brazier coals, Cassian's even breathing, the steady cadence of Lucian's breath across the space between them. A soft knock came, followed by the older sentry from the gate, rain damp again despite the cleared sky, jaw set with the expression of a wolf bringing news he did not want to carry. "Alpha," he said, then glanced at Aurora and corrected himself. "Sanctuary Lady, courier intercepted at the Eastern Bridge, Thornwood seal." Lucian stood. "Who broke it?" "No one. Wax is intact." "Good. Bring it here." The sentry passed over a narrow black packet tied in mourning thread. The wax carried Nikolai's crest pressed deep enough to crack at the edges, as if force could substitute for legitimacy. Lucian broke the seal with one thumb, unfolded the thick parchment, and read in silence. Aurora watched the muscles in his throat tighten. "Read it aloud," she said. He did, voice clipped and cold. Nikolai demanded immediate transfer of Aurora Frostborn to Thornwood custody for formal prosecution under reciprocal blood law. The letter included witness statements from Captain Vane and Captain Sorrel, both swearing Aurora had procured poison before Mikhail's death. It accused her of manipulating Blackwood's heir through unnatural maternal compulsion, and warned that harboring her constituted an act of conspiracy against regional order. The closing line was pure theater. Nikolai offered to cleanse this misfortune through a marriage alliance once the widow's corruption had been resolved. The sentry muttered, unable to stop himself. "He means to make himself indispensable while he sets the fire." Lucian handed him the page. "Stand post. No one enters without my voice." When the door closed, Aurora exhaled through her teeth. "He moved faster than I expected." "Because he already had the script," Lucian said. "He only needed you visible inside my walls." She crossed to the washstand cabinet and knelt with care, fighting the pull in her lower back. From beneath the false bottom, she drew out waxed cloth tied with frayed thread and held it out. "Then we stop answering his script. These are mine." Lucian unwrapped the pages and spread them over the nursery desk under lamplight. Payment marks, dates, border routes, 2 captain signatures reduced to account entries. On the third page, written in Nikolai's private cipher hand, was a line Aurora had not been able to decode in Thornwood Keep. Here, with better light, and Lucian's knowledge of trade abbreviations, it became horrifyingly clear. Transfer at Hollow Ford. Separate widow from escort under sedative protocol. Deliver issue intact to designated surgeon before tribunal. Aurora's stomach turned hard. Issue. "He wrote about your child like cargo," Lucian said, voice gone flat with controlled fury. "I told you he would not stop at killing one heir." Her fingers shook once and then steadied. "He never cared about law. He cared about ownership." Lucian looked up at her, and amber edged his irises. "This changes the board. He is not only trying to discredit you, he is preparing extraction and forced bloodline claim." Cassian shifted in his sleep and made a small sound. Aurora returned to the bedside, pressed his blanket smooth, then stood straighter than she felt. "Then we place this where he cannot bury it." Lucian nodded once. "Chain of custody tonight. Scribe, healer, 2 witnesses, lock archive." He crossed to the door, gave 3 short knocks in code, and called for the sentry, for the hall scribe, and for the healer with silver braids. When they arrived, he did not shield the pages or lower his voice. He named each item, each source, each line. He ordered the scribe to copy and seal with time mark and witness signatures. He assigned 1 copy to archive, 1 to his personal vault, and 1 to be sent under guard to the Neutral Records House in Greymere by dawn. Evidence that had nearly died in Aurora's dress lining became record in front of law. By the next evening, every wolf in the fortress knew 2 competing truths: that Aurora had soothed Cassian when no one else could, and that Nikolai had formally branded her a murderer and corrupter of children. The resulting tension did not explode. It tightened, thread by thread. Servants bowed but lingered just outside conversation range. Junior guards straightened when Aurora passed, trying to hide uncertainty behind protocol. In the training yard, two warriors stopped sparring when she and Lucian crossed the arcade, then resumed with needless force, as though striking each other might answer the question of where loyalty should settle. Cassian's improvement made denial harder, yet fear remained a powerful language, and Nikolai was fluent in it. Late that night, Aurora sat in the record room with Lucian and the fortress archivist, sorting testimony fragments while rain started again in a fine hiss against slate roofs. The room smelled of old ink, cedar shelves, and hot wax. Lucian stood behind her chair reading a map over her shoulder, close enough for warmth, far enough to respect the line she still kept. Every time he leaned to point at a route marker, a low thrum built behind her ribs, immediate and unwelcome and alive. Present tense thought sharpened in her like flint striking flint. I know what this pull can do to judgment. I know hunger can mimic trust when loneliness has lasted too long, but he is not rushing me. He is not turning tenderness into leverage. He asks, waits, listens, and then keeps his word in public where it costs him. I am afraid of needing that. I am more afraid of pretending I do not. Your hand is cramping, Lucian said quietly. She had not realized she was gripping the quill hard enough to blanch her knuckles. She flexed her fingers. I am fine. You are enduring, he replied. Not the same thing. A short laugh escaped her, dry and surprised. You make that sound like a flaw. It kept you alive. It should not be your only tool. Before she could answer, the archivist cleared his throat and slid over another decoded note taken from the intercepted courier's saddle seam. It contained no signature, only instructions. Stir fear around the child, force relocation to sanctified ground, trigger crowd witness, reclaim narrative through ritual authority. A final line had been scratched out but remained legible under angled light. If Blackwood refuses transfer, provoke emergency at Moon Temple. Smoke is enough. Panic will open doors. Aurora felt the room tip by a fraction. He wants me in the temple. Lucian's gaze hardened. Because challenge law there can be manipulated if the crowd is primed. And because Cassian cannot ignore alarms, she said. He'll run toward the nearest familiar scent. Mine. Lucian turned to the archivist. No copies beyond this room. Lock that note. He dispatched orders immediately, each command precise. Double watch on nursery corridors. Fire checks every bell. Temple wardens alerted through runner. No child moved without his seal or Aurora's voice confirmation. The machinery of protection moved fast, but urgency carried its own cost. The more guards at doors, the more visible Aurora became as the axis of crisis. 3 days passed before the first external reply returned from Greymere Records House. The message was brief and damning. Thornwood's witness affidavits used mismatched inks and pressure-stamped seals applied after parchment curing, a classic forgery pattern in inheritance disputes. Lucian read the report in council with no rhetorical flourish. Marone did not apologize. He only asked whether Thornwood's captains could be compelled to testify in person. Lucian answered yes, and sent summons under neutral flag. Captain Sorrel arrived at dusk with mud to his knees and fear in his eyes. Captain Vane did not arrive at all. Sorrel gave his testimony in the lower hall while half the council watched. His voice shook once, then steadied as if choosing a side in real time. Nikolai had paid both captains to log false tincture entries and prepare transfer escort. There was to be no true tribunal. Aurora would be sedated, her child removed from her claim, and both outcomes certified after the fact by a physician indebted to Thornwood coin. Sorrel swore he had not understood the full plan when he took the payment. Few believed that part. He signed anyway. When the hearing ended, Lucian ordered Sorrel confined pending sentencing but protected from retaliation as a cooperating witness. It was the right legal balance. It still left one captain missing, one conspirator free, and Nikolai cornered enough to become reckless. Reckless came sooner than expected. The first alarm bell struck just after moonrise, a harsh iron clang from the western quarter. Then another, and another, too close together to be standard signal. Smoke curled beneath the corridor arch outside the nursery wing, thin at first, then thicker, carrying the bitter tang of pitch rather than grain. Shouts erupted from the lower courtyard. "Fire in the granary!" "Bucket line! West gate!" Guards broke formation to run response routes. Doors opened. Footsteps thundered away. Aurora was already moving, Cassian in her arms, blanket wrapped around him, when Lucian reached the nursery threshold with 2 warriors at his back. The child clung to her neck, awake and shaking but silent, face buried against her shoulder. "This smoke is wrong," Aurora said. "It's a lure." Lucian sniffed once, expression turning lethal. Lamp oil and temple resin, not granary straw. A crash sounded from the stairwell. One of Lucian's warriors shouted, then grunted with impact. Another yell followed, cut short. Figures in Blackwood guard cloaks surged through the haze, too coordinated, too clean. And then one turned and she saw thornwood knotwork sewn inside the cuff. Infiltrators. "Behind me," Lucian ordered, claws out, eyes feral. Aurora backed toward the inner chapel door off the nursery corridor, heart hammering, Cassian's weight tight and precious against her chest. The first attacker lunged at Lucian with a hooked blade, forcing him sideways. A second came low, not toward the Alpha, toward Aurora, reaching for the child. She pivoted, slammed her shoulder into the wall to shield Cassian, and drove her knee into the attacker's midline. He folded with a curse. The third infiltrator hurled a clay capsule at the floor. It burst in a bloom of choking white smoke that burned eyes and throat without flame. "Not fire!" Lucian shouted through the haze. "Blind gas. Hold breath." Cassian coughed once, panicked. Aurora pulled the blanket over his nose and mouth and dropped to one knee to keep him below the densest cloud. Boots pounded. Metal rang against stone. Lucian's snarl cut through the corridor, followed by the crack of impact and a body hitting the wall. Then, through smoke and chaos, a temple bell began to ring from the far side of the fortress. Not alarm rhythm, ritual summons. One of the infiltrators laughed wetly as Lucian pinned him. "Too late, Blackwood. The temple doors are open." Aurora's blood ran cold. Moon Temple. Open doors. Smoke is enough. Panic will open doors. She lifted her head, eyes stinging, and saw a runner burst into the corridor from the eastern arcade, soot streaked across his face, voice breaking with urgency. "Alpha! They hit the temple wardens. The inner sanctum is breached. They're heading for the child." The situation stopped being a threat and became a countdown. Lucian seized the nearest infiltrator by the collar and slammed him against the stone hard enough to rattle the sconces. "How many in the temple?" The male bared bloodless teeth through the smoke. "Enough." Aurora shifted Cassian higher on her shoulder and forced herself to think past the burn in her lungs. If the Moon Temple doors were open, Nikolai had not come for a silent abduction. He had come for witnesses, public ritual, manufactured legitimacy. He wanted panic to herd the pack into one place, then force a legal narrative before anyone could verify facts. "Lucian, listen to me." Her voice came hoarse but steady. "This is not a raid, it is a stage." He ripped the infiltrator's cloak pin free, exposing Thornwood stitching beneath. "I know." "No, you know it is an attack. I know what part he wrote for me." She looked at the runner, then the 2 Blackwood warriors still standing. "Where is the healer?" "Nursery Annex," one warrior answered. "Get her." Cassian goes to the vault chamber under matron guard now. No corridor stops, no temple route. She dropped to Cassian's level, cupping his hot cheeks. You go with Healer Greybraid. You stay with her until I come. Look at me. His eyes were huge, frightened, searching her face for certainty she did not fully own. You too? I come after. She kissed his brow once. You are brave. Do it now. Lucian caught her wrist before she could rise. You are not going alone. I am not going unguarded, she corrected. But if you walk into that circle first, he turns this into Alpha War and claims I am your weapon. He needs me discredited. I need him speaking. A harsh clang from the far bell tower rolled through the smoke. Ritual summons again, closer this time. Less than 10 minutes after the first alarm, the western corridor had become a funnel of shouting wolves, pails, wet cloaks, and fear. Lucian carved a path through it with sheer command, while Aurora moved in his wake, one hand braced beneath her belly, the other gripping the rail each time pain tugged at her lower back. The smoke thinned near the inner court, revealing the temple steps lit by too many torches for emergency response. Wolves were already gathering there in confused clusters, some armed, some half-dressed, all watching the open bronze doors. Nikolai stood at the top landing in formal black, as if he had stepped out of mourning portraiture, not sabotage. Rain silvered his shoulders. Captain Vane flanked him with 3 Thornwood loyalists in borrowed Blackwood cloaks. At Nikolai's left, bound but upright, stood one of the temple wardens with a split lip and fury in his eyes. Nikolai spread his hands when he saw Aurora. There she is, the grieving widow who runs from justice and hides behind another Alpha's walls. A ripple went through the crowd. Lucian moved half a step forward, and Aurora snapped, "Do not!" His gaze cut to her, feral and incandescent, then he held position by raw effort. Nikolai smiled at that. Even now you obey her scent. How tragic for Blackwood. Aurora climbed the first temple step, then the second, ignoring the shout from Marin somewhere behind her and the pounding in her ears that matched the bells. She stopped at the edge of the ritual circle carved into the floor, old frost runes intertwined with moon sigils. She had seen that geometry as a child in her mother's books. Frostborn adjudication law. Surviving but rarely invoked. Present tense clarity dropped into her like cold water. This is the fulcrum. If I wait for rescue, he defines me. If I speak from fear, he twists it. If I claim the law that was built to erase wolves like him, he has to stand where everyone can see him and answer. My hands are shaking. My child is pressing hard against my ribs. I am still afraid. Step anyway. She entered the circle alone. Nikolai Thornwood, she called, voice carrying over rain and murmurs. I invoke Frostborn air challenge under Moon Witness and Bloodright. Gasps broke across the landing. Nikolai's expression tightened for the first time. You have no standing, he said. I am Aurora Frostborn by birth, widow by your design, and wronged claimant under attempted line theft. She drew the ceremonial oath blade from the temple dais, its edge dull from disuse but still sharp enough. Under challenge law, all outside interference is frozen until truth is weighed. Lucian's growl rolled low behind her. She did not turn. Alpha Blackwood, she said, each word deliberate. Hold your line. That is my command under claim right. The command struck him visibly, mate bond and law colliding. His jaw flexed, claws biting into his own palms, but he did not cross the circle. Aurora cut her palm across the oath stone. Silver light flared where blood touched carved runes, then raced along the ring at her feet. The temple air changed, pressure dropping as ancient magic woke. Nikolai took an involuntary step back. You forged witness statements, Aurora said. You bribed captains. You ordered my sedation and the theft of my unborn child. Deny it. Nikolai laughed, though it came thin. Paranoid grief. You always did confuse fear with prophecy. The runes around his boots tightened, thin strands of silver rising like threads in water and winding around his ankles. Murmurs sharpened. Aurora lifted her bleeding hand and felt the same clean heat that had calmed Cassian gather now with greater force, not soothing, but binding. These runes answer false speech. Deny again? I deny every word. The silver bands climbed to his knees. Vayne swore and lunged to cut them. The blade bounced off with a bright crack that sent him reeling. Lucian barked to his warriors. Disarm Thornwood men. No one enters the ring. Steel rang, cloaks hit stone. The crowd recoiled, then held, caught between terror and fascination. Aurora kept her eyes on Nikolai. Where is the ledger? What ledger? The runes cinched higher, up his thighs, across his waist. Nikolai's composure splintered. This circus proves nothing. Captain Sorel's voice broke from the back of the crowd, hoarse but clear as two guards dragged him forward from confinement. Tell them about Hollow Ford, Nikolai. Tell them what you paid for. Nikolai snapped his head toward him, hatred naked now. Traitor! Aurora pointed at Vayne. Search him. A Blackwood warrior ripped open Vayne's satchel and hauled out a narrow leather book with Thornwood crestwork burned into the cover. He tossed it to the edge of the circle. Aurora picked it up, flipped to marked pages, and read aloud, each line a hammer blow. Payment release on McHale route. Confirmation from Vayne and Sorrel. Widow transfer protocol approved. Issue intact for extraction prior to tribunal certification. Her voice shook once and steadied. Signed with your private sigil. The temple went dead quiet except for Rain and Nikolai's ragged breathing. He bared his teeth, half-shift rippling through his hands, claws forcing through the skin at his knuckles. You think reading numbers makes you sovereign? No, Aurora said. Truth does. He roared and drove forward through the runes, brute strength and fury tearing silver threads apart one by one. The crowd screamed and stumbled back. Lucian moved, and Aurora threw her arm out without looking. Stay back. Nikolai breached the inner line with one gauntleted hand raised, claws extended, the other reaching into his sleeve for a slim metal glint. Needle. Toxin. Exactly as she had feared. Aurora planted her feet, drew the moonlight into her palms, and released it. The force hit him center mass in a burst of silver white that shattered the clawed gauntlet and hurled him down the altar steps. He struck stone and slid to his knees, coughing, one arm hanging useless. The needle skittered across the floor and spun to a stop at the base of the oath stone. Nikolai looked up at her with pure malice. You were always the weak one. Aurora descended the steps until she stood over him, breath shaking, blood still dripping from her cut palm onto the runes that now bound his chest and throat. She took up the oath blade in both hands. No, uncle, she said, the words ringing through the temple. I was the one you could not break. He spat toward her belly and lunged for the fallen needle with his good hand. Aurora drove the oath blade into his chest in one clean, committed thrust. He froze, shock replacing rage, then sagged back against the step. The runes flared bright enough to bleach color from the stone, then burned his blood sigil from the temple record wall in a cascade of ash and light. When the glow faded, Nikolai lay still. No one moved for several heartbeats. Then Lucian crossed the circle at last, slow enough that she saw every step, hands open, eyes fixed on her face rather than the blade. He stopped within arm's reach and waited. Aurora's fingers loosened. The blade clattered softly to stone. Her knees threatened to fold, and he caught her elbows, steady but careful, as if she were both warrior and breakable thing. Behind them, Marin found his voice. By witnessed challenge and confessed record, Nikolai Thornwood is judged traitor under Frostborn and Blackwood law. Conspirators are to be seized. Blackwood warriors moved immediately, pinning Vayne and the remaining infiltrators. Sorrel dropped to the floor and wept once, quietly, then covered his face. Temple bells fell silent. Rain softened to a whisper on the roof. Only after Lucian ordered the landing secured and Marin confirmed all clear did runners open the protected inner passage from the vault route. Healer Greybraid kept Cassian under matron guard until that command was given. Aurora turned her head toward the side arch, searching through blur and torchlight until she found Healer Greybraid standing there, with Cassian wrapped in dry wool, alive, untouched, staring at her with solemn, exhausted wonder. He held out his arms. Mama Aurora. The name struck deeper than victory. She stepped toward him, and Lucian stayed at her shoulder, not shielding her from the sight of what she had done, only bearing witness as the pack watched the broken widow stand in the center of the temple and remain standing. She did remain standing, but only because Lucian kept his hands at her elbows until her breath found a rhythm that was hers again. Healer Greybraid crossed the final steps, checked Aurora's pulse with 2 quick fingers, then placed Cassian carefully into her arms. The child's lashes were wet, his fever mostly broken, his small body trembling with spent fear. He tucked his face against Aurora's neck and clung until his breathing slowed. Vault chamber held, the healer said to Lucian, voice firm despite exhaustion. No breach. Temple Warden Jarek will recover. Concussion, bruised ribs, nothing torn beyond mending. I want the child warm and horizontal within minutes. Lucian nodded. You have authority. Maron was already barking orders below, the old blade of his voice turned toward procedure now that blood had answered law. Secure the needle. Seal the circle stones. Record every witness by name before dawn. No one leaves the inner court uncounted. Aurora heard it all as if from a great distance, then felt Lucian shift closer. He did not touch her throat where the mate pull burned like a second pulse. He waited until she looked at him. Challenge law is released, he said quietly. No force binds me now except what you choose. Her palm found her belly by instinct. The baby rolled, strong and insistent. A living answer to terror survived. Cassian's weight settled heavier against her shoulder as sleep took him in uneven waves. Not here, she whispered, glancing once toward Nikolai's covered body and the scorched wall where his sigil had vanished. I want one room in this fortress that does not smell like him. Lucian inclined his head. Then we go to the old moon chamber. Witnessed. Private. By the time they reached the chamber above the western cloister, Cassian had fallen fully asleep against Aurora's shoulder, clutching the edge of her sleeve with stubborn trust. The room held only a low fire, carved stone, and moonlight spilling through narrow arches. The scent was cedar ash and clean linen, no pitch, no blood, no smoke. Lucian closed the door but left it unlatched. He crossed to the hearth, set his claws into the mantle and breathed once, twice, visibly mastering the same feral urgency riding her skin. When he turned back, his eyes were amber dark, the predator present and disciplined. Aurora, he said, voice rough with restraint, look at me and answer plainly. Do you choose me? Not from fear, not from debt, but from your own will. She shifted Cassian into the padded settle beside the fire, tucked a blanket around him, and stood with one hand over her belly. The bond between her and Lucian thrummed, fierce and aching and no longer deniable. Fear was still there. So was grief. So was memory of every locked door she had outrun. But beneath all of it, steadier than panic, was the truth of his choices when she was weakest. Ask, wait, obey, protect in public, hold the line she drew. Yes, she said, I choose you. His shoulders lowered by a fraction, as if a blade had been withdrawn from under his ribs. Still, he did not move yet. Do you consent to my mark? Yes. He stepped forward slowly enough that she could have stepped back. She did not. He bared his own throat first, head tilted, a king offering surrender before claim. The gesture hit her harder than any vow spoken in the council hall. Mine, he whispered, not as ownership, but as reverence. Yours, she answered, and the words steadied her. Then he touched her jaw, thumb warm, and waited one final heartbeat before lowering his mouth to the mating pulse at the junction of her neck and shoulder. The bite was sharp, bright pain that cracked through shock and found marrow. She gasped and grabbed his forearm, his runes flared gold under her fingers. The hurt lasted only an instant before heat rushed in behind it, liquid and luminous, pouring through the bond in a tidal sweep. Not frenzy, recognition. Relief so profound it bordered grief, as if two severed halves of a map had finally aligned. She felt his devotion like a physical force, protective and kneeling, and beneath it the old wound he never voiced, centuries of command without belonging. Mate. He breathed against her skin. The mark sealed with a pulse of gold-silver light that raced from her throat to her sternum, to her belly, to the child she carried. The baby kicked once, hard, then settled, and a laugh broke from Aurora through tears she had not meant to shed. Lucian pulled back at once, searching her face. Too much? No. Her voice shook. No. Stay. She cupped the back of his neck and guided him down, then turned and set her teeth into the thick muscle of his shoulder where cloth had already torn in battle. She bit with intention, hard enough for blood to rise, hard enough that he groaned and went still under her hands. Mine, she whispered into his skin. He answered, eyes closing as the reciprocal mark took hold. Yours. The completion hit them both like a deep bell struck once. The bond settled, no longer a frantic wire but a woven current, warm and constant. She felt Cassian in the edge of it too, not bound as mate, but sheltered within the same field of safety that had drawn him to her hand in the first place. Lucian felt it at the same moment. She knew because his expression changed from awe to quiet certainty. He gathered her against his chest with exquisite care around her belly, and she let herself lean. For the first time in many months, the animal vigilance under her skin eased without vanishing, becoming watchfulness shared instead of solitary. No more exile, she murmured. No more loneliness, he replied, forehead resting against hers, for either of our children. 4 days after the temple challenge, the great hall filled before sunset, every bench taken, every torch lit. Rain had finally broken, and cold, clean wind came through the high vents carrying pine and thawing earth. At the center dais stood Meron, healer Greybraid, temple warden Jarek with his ribs bound, and 2 neutral clerks from Greymere holding sealed packets. Aurora stood at Lucian's right in dark wool and silver thread, the fresh mark at her throat visible by her own choice. Cassian sat on a carved chair beside the healer, swinging his legs and clutching a wooden wolf someone had carved for him overnight. The clerks read findings into open record. The 3 ledger pages recovered from Aurora's hidden cache, authenticated. Vane's confession ledger seized at the temple, authenticated. The toxin needle recovered from the altar step. Residue matched the sedative compound named in Nikolai's transfer protocol. Thornwood affidavits, forged. Chain of custody, intact from nursery archive to Greymere registry and back. Then came judgment. Captain Vane was stripped of rank and exiled beyond the northern boundary under guard. Rurik and Lady Isra, named in Sorrel's supplemental testimony as co-conspirators in confinement planning and false nursery rumors, were exiled with property claims voided. Captain Sorrel, for cooperation and signed confession before attack escalation, was exiled rather than executed, his oath marks burned and travel ration granted by Aurora's decision. Meron turned to her before the full pack. High judgment lies with the wronged heir. Confirm. Aurora held his gaze. Once, she would have mistaken the old wolf's reserve for contempt. Now she recognized the harder offering beneath it, institutional obedience, finally given where it had long been withheld. I confirm, she said, No bloodline coercion will ever be law in this territory again. Lucian took the law tablet and carved the new statute himself, each stroke audible in the hushed hall. Bloodline coercion, forced gestation seizure, false tribunal transfer, and child claim through fraud were henceforth high crimes across both Blackwood and Frostborn holdings. He passed the stylus to Aurora, and she signed beneath him. When the crown circlet was brought, it was not ornate. Frost silver, black iron, moonstone at the center. Maron did not place it. He offered it to Cassian. The boy slid from his chair, carried it with solemn concentration to Aurora, and lifted both arms. She knelt to meet him. He set the circlet crooked on her dark hair and grinned, gap-toothed and radiant. Laughter broke across the hall, brief and warm, tension breaking without cruelty. Lucian adjusted the crown straight with one careful touch, then bowed his head before her in full view of every rank. "High Luna Aurora Frostborn Blackwood," he said. The hall knelt as one. By the first night of early spring, labor came hard and honest under a waxing moon, not in panic, not in hiding. The same chamber that once held smoke and fear now smelled of lavender steam, clean wool, and hearth fire. Healer Greybraid commanded the room like a battlefield general. Lucian obeyed every order without argument, and Cassian waited in the adjoining sitting room with Jarek, whispering fierce promises to the carved wolf in his hands. Aurora bore down through pain that no longer frightened her because nothing about it was theft. At dawn, her daughter entered the world with a furious cry and a full head of dark hair. Lucian wept once, silently, when the healer laid the baby on Aurora's chest. Later, wrapped in blankets before the council fire, Aurora sat with her daughter nursing in the crook of one arm while Lucian rested at her side, one hand over both of them. Cassian padded in barefoot, hair wild from sleep, and climbed carefully onto the bench. He touched the baby's foot, then looked up at Aurora with complete certainty. "Mama." The word settled into the room like a blessing claimed. No one corrected him. No one dared. Outside, wolves changed watch under a clear sky. Inside, record books closed on one dynasty of fear and opened on another built by choice. Aurora looked at the fire, at the two children safe within reach, at the mate mark mirrored on her and Lucian like twin signatures, and felt the future arrive not as a dream, but as a home she had helped build with her own hands.